Your time is over.
The flash drive felt heavier than it should have in my palm. Anonymous package, no return address, just my name scrawled across brown paper in handwriting I didn't recognize. I'd been fixing the Henderson's furnace when it arrived. Mrs. Henderson signed for it with flour on her hands, apologizing for the mess. "Someone really wanted you to get this," she said, studying the package. Back in my truck, I plugged the drive into my laptop. One audio file. Duration, 43 minutes. The first voice made my stomach drop. Natalie, my wife of 8 years, laughing in that throaty way she used when she wanted something. "Charles, you're terrible," she purred. The second voice stopped my world. "Come here, beautiful. Let me show you just how terrible I can be." My father's voice. Charles Dawson, pillar of the community, owner of half the construction contracts in this dying lakeside town. I sat in that truck for 2 hours, listening to my wife and my father destroy everything I thought I knew about my life. The recordings spanned months, hotel rooms, his office, even our house, my house, while I was working. "Clay's so oblivious," Natalie laughed in one segment. "Yesterday, he thanked me for doing laundry. I wanted to tell him I was washing the smell of his father off my skin." "He's always been weak," Charles replied, "even as a kid. Military didn't fix him, marriage won't either. Some people are just broken." My hands were shaking when I finally turned off the laptop. The Henderson job could wait. Everything could wait. I drove home through streets I'd known my whole life, past the abandoned paper mill, past the fancy lakefront homes where Charles lived, past the failing downtown where desperate business owners hung "for lease" signs like white flags. Natalie was grading papers at our kitchen table when I walked in. She looked up with that practiced smile teachers use on difficult children. "How was work, honey? You look pale." I studied her face. Same green eyes that had captivated me in college. Same freckles across her nose. Same lying mouth that had been kissing my father. "Fine," I said. "Just tired." She nodded and returned to her papers. Red ink bled across a child's math homework like small wounds. I went upstairs and sat on our bed, staring at the flash drive. Anonymous. Someone wanted me to know. Someone who had access to these recordings. Someone who wanted to watch my world burn. The smart move would be confrontation. Demand answers. File for divorce, walk away clean. But I'd learned something in Afghanistan that civilian life had tried to make me forget. Sometimes the smart move isn't the right move. Sometimes you have to plan. I hid the flash drive in my toolbox between the socket wrenches and electrical tape. Then I went downstairs and kissed my wife's forehead. "I love you," I said. "Love you too," she replied without looking up. The lie came so easily to her. 3 days later, I followed them. Natalie said she had a faculty meeting. Charles told his secretary he was inspecting a job site. I watched them meet at the Riverside Inn, 20 miles outside town where nobody would recognize Charles Dawson's Mercedes. They looked like lovers. The way Charles held the door, how Natalie touched his arm, natural, practiced. This wasn't new. I sat in my truck across the parking lot for 40 minutes until they emerged. Natalie's hair was different, messier. Charles straightened his tie. They kissed goodbye like teenagers. I drove home and found Natalie in our shower, humming some song I didn't recognize. Steam filled the bathroom, and through the frosted glass, I could see her washing her hair twice. "How was the meeting?" I called out. "Boring," she said. Budget discussions mostly. Another lie, delivered with the casual ease of someone who'd had plenty of practice. That night, I lay awake, listening to her breathe beside me. She slept peacefully, one hand curled under her pillow. No guilt disturbed her dreams. I started making lists in my head. Assets, timeline, vulnerabilities. Charles owned Dawson Construction, the biggest contractor in 3 counties. He employed 47 people, including my best friend Mika, who ran the HVAC division. He lived in a 6,000 square foot house on Lake Meridian, drove a $100,000 car, and belonged to the country club where he played golf with judges and city councilmen. He'd also disowned me 3 years ago when my PTSD got bad and I couldn't work for 6 months. Called me weak. Said I was embarrassing the family name. Natalie taught 4th grade at Meridian Elementary. She made $52,000 a year, drove a Honda Civic I'd helped her buy, and lived in the house I'd inherited from my grandmother. The house Charles had wanted to sell after the funeral. They thought I was stupid. Blue-collar Clay with his tools and his trauma, married above his station to a college graduate who deserved better. Maybe they were right. But stupid people could learn to be smart, and smart people sometimes got careless. "You look like hell," Mika said when I showed up at the shop Monday morning. Mika Vasquez was the only person who'd stuck by me through the breakdown 3 years ago. While Charles was cutting me off and Natalie was giving me space to heal, Mika brought me groceries and made sure I didn't drink myself to death. She was also the smartest person I knew. 2 engineering degrees, spoke 4 languages, could rewire a commercial HVAC system blindfolded. She ran Charles's mechanical division because she was too good at her job for him to let his prejudices get in the way. "Rough weekend," I said, pulling on my work uniform. "Natalie okay?" "Natalie's fine. Question for you, hypothetically. If someone wanted to get information about another person's activities, how would they go about it?" Mika set down her coffee and studied my face. "Hypothetically? I'd ask what kind of information and whether this person was planning to do something stupid. The legal kind, public records, business filings, that sort of thing. County clerk's office, state business registry, property assessments are public." "Why?" "Just curious." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Clay, whatever you're thinking about doing, think twice. Your father isn't someone you want to cross. He's not my father anymore, remember? He made that clear. He's still the man who signs my paychecks. And yours." I nodded. "I know, don't worry about it." But I could see the concern in her eyes. Mika was smart enough to read between the lines. That afternoon, I drove to the county courthouse. Public records were exactly that, public. I pulled Charles's business filings for the past 5 years, property assessments for all his holdings, and tax records for Dawson Construction. Interesting reading. Charles's company was leveraged higher than it appeared. Several projects were behind schedule. He'd taken out significant loans against his personal property in the past 18 months. The empire wasn't as solid as it looked from the outside. I made copies of everything and drove to the library. Anonymous internet access and a quick record search revealed more. Natalie's teaching contract was up for renewal this year. She'd had 2 formal complaints filed against her in the past 12 months, both dismissed, but the paperwork remained in her file. People weren't as untouchable as they thought. That evening, Natalie made my favorite dinner. Pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the recipe she'd learned from my grandmother. "You've been quiet lately," she said, setting the plate in front of me. "Work's been busy. Maybe we should take a vacation. Get away for a weekend." I met her eyes across the table. "That sounds nice. Where were you thinking?" "Somewhere we've never been. Fresh start. Fresh start. Like our marriage was a business venture that needed rebranding." "I'll think about it," I said. After dinner, she curled up beside me on the couch to watch television, her head on my shoulder, one hand resting on my chest. We'd sat like this 1,000 times over 8 years. Now it felt like playing house with a stranger. My phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. "Check your email." I waited until Natalie fell asleep, then slipped into the kitchen with my laptop. New message in my inbox. No sender name, just an address, meridiantruth@protonmail.com. Subject line, more where that came from. Inside was a link to a cloud storage account. Password, Clay deserves better. 23 audio files, dozens of photos. Security camera footage from the Riverside Inn. Text messages between Natalie and Charles going back 14 months. Someone had been documenting their affair in detail. Someone who wanted me to have evidence. At the bottom of the email was a single line. "They destroyed you once. Don't let them do it again." I closed the laptop and looked at my sleeping wife. Her face was peaceful in the blue glow of the television. She looked younger when she slept, like the graduate student I'd fallen in love with 10 years ago. That woman was gone. Maybe she'd never existed. I kissed her forehead and went upstairs to bed. Tomorrow, I would start planning. The next week, I became a different person. On the surface, nothing changed. I went to work, fixed broken furnaces, came home to dinner with my wife. But underneath, I was gathering intelligence like I'd been trained to do in the Army. Charles's patterns were predictable. Office by 7:30, lunch at the country club Tuesdays and Thursdays, home by 6 unless he was meeting Natalie. He drove the same route every day, parked in the same spot, ordered the same coffee from the same shop. Natalie was more careful, but patterns emerged. The affair had been going on for 14 months, according to the timestamps on the photos. Always Tuesday and Friday afternoons when I was working late jobs. Always the Riverside Inn or Charles's office after hours. She'd been planning this. The timing wasn't coincidence. I started working different shifts, telling Mika I needed to handle some personal business. She didn't ask questions, just adjusted the schedule. Tuesday afternoon, I watched Charles's office building. At 3:15, Natalie's Honda pulled into the parking garage. She emerged wearing a dress I'd never seen before and took the elevator to the 15th floor where Dawson Construction kept its executive offices. She stayed 2 hours and 17 minutes. Friday was the hotel, same routine, same timing. They'd booked the same room every week for over a year. I photographed license plates, noted times, built a timeline. Professional habits die hard. The anonymous contact sent me more information. Financial records showing Charles had been paying for Natalie's car insurance, her credit cards, even her student loans. My wife had been on his payroll longer than I'd realized. There were other details. Charles had attended every school event where Natalie taught, always sitting in the back. He'd sent flowers to our house when I was deployed, signed the card a family friend. He'd recommended Natalie for the teaching position at Meridian Elementary. They'd been circling each other for years before the physical affair started. I'd been blind to all of it. The worst part was reading their text messages. Not the content, that was just betrayal. The worst part was how they talked about me. Natalie. He asked about the credit card again. I told him work was reimbursing me for classroom supplies. Charles. He's always been gullible, even as a kid. Natalie. Sometimes I think he knows something's wrong, but he's too scared to ask. Charles. Clay was never brave. Military didn't change that. They saw me as weak, pathetic, someone to be managed and manipulated. Maybe I had been, but weak people could learn to be strong. On Thursday, I approached Mika during lunch break. I need a favor, I said. Name it. I need to know everything about Dawson Construction's current projects, contracts, timelines, budgets, everything. She studied my face carefully. That's confidential company information, Clay. I know. Charles would fire both of us if he found out. I understand. She was quiet for a long moment, then, how much trouble are you in? More than you know. Less than I'm going to cause. Another pause. Give me 24 hours. Friday evening, Mika handed me a USB drive. Everything's on there, she said. Project files, financial statements, payroll records, vendor contracts. If anyone asks, this conversation never happened. Thank you. Clay? She grabbed my arm as I turned to leave. Whatever you're planning, be careful. Charles has friends in this town, important friends. I know. He also has enemies. People who've been waiting for him to make a mistake. That was interesting. Such as? Rick Maddox, for one. Charles's business partner for 15 years, but they've been feuding lately. Something about profit sharing and project assignments. Rick thinks Charles is cutting him out. Rick Maddox, former police detective turned private security contractor. Charles's partner in several lucrative government contracts. Thanks for the tip. That night, I stayed up until 3 in the morning, studying everything Mika had given me. Financial records, employee files, project timelines, vendor relationships. Charles's empire was built on connections and reputation. Government contracts that came through personal relationships. Bank loans secured by properties that were leveraged beyond their actual value. A complex web of interdependent deals that looked impressive from the outside but were vulnerable to the right pressure. I found what I was looking for in the payroll records. Natalie Dawson was listed as a consulting contractor for Dawson Construction. She'd been receiving monthly payments of $3,000 for educational services for the past 14 months. The same 14 months she'd been sleeping with my father. Charles wasn't just having an affair with my wife, he was buying her. And that was something I could use. Sunday morning, I told Natalie I was going fishing. Instead, I drove to Rick Maddox's house. He lived in a modest, split level on the other side of town, the kind of place a working man could afford without help from family money. Rick answered the door in sweatpants and a paint-stained t-shirt. He was younger than Charles, maybe 40, with the kind of solid build that came from physical work rather than gym memberships. Clay Dawson, he said, recognizing me. Didn't expect to see you here. Can we talk? He stepped aside and let me in. The house was neat but lived in. Photos of Rick in his police uniform, commendations on the wall, pictures of him with a woman and 2 kids. Divorce, he explained, noticing me looking at the family photos. 2 years ago. Coffee? Thanks. We sat at his kitchen table. Rick studied me with cop eyes, reading body language and facial expressions like he'd been trained to do. So what brings Charles Dawson's son to my door on a Sunday morning? I'm not his son anymore. He made that clear 3 years ago. Right, the disowning. Heard about that. A rough break. It was, but I'm over it. Rick sipped his coffee and waited. Good interrogation technique. Let the other person fill the silence. I hear you and Charles have been having some disagreements lately, I said. Where'd you hear that? Small town, people talk. People should mind their own business. Maybe, but sometimes other people's business affects you whether you want it to or not. Rick leaned back in his chair. You want to tell me what this is really about, Clay? I reached into my jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside were copies of financial records showing the consulting payments to Natalie, along with photos of her entering Charles's office building. Rick looked through the documents slowly, his expression never changing. When he finished, he set them aside and met my eyes. Your wife's been on Charles's payroll for over a year, he said. Consulting fees for educational services. $3,000 a month. What kind of educational services? The kind that happen behind closed doors on Tuesday and Friday afternoons? Rick was quiet for a moment. You have proof? Audio recordings, photos, hotel receipts, text messages, financial records. Enough to end both their careers and probably their freedom if the IRS decides those consulting fees were fraudulent. Why bring this to me? Because Charles has been cutting you out of contracts lately. Profit sharing isn't what it used to be. You've been partners for 15 years, but lately he's been treating you like an employee. How do you know that? Because I've been doing my homework. Charles is leveraged up to his eyeballs on properties that are losing value. He's behind on 3 major projects, and the government contracts you've been counting on are drying up. He needs money, so he's squeezing everyone around him. Rick's expression hadn't changed, but I could see him processing the information. What do you want from me? Nothing illegal, nothing that would put you at risk. Just information when I need it, and maybe a little professional advice about evidence handling. In exchange for what? In exchange for being there when Charles's house of cards comes down, which it will. With or without your help. Rick was quiet for a long moment. Then, Charles has been my partner for 15 years, Clay. We've made a lot of money together. And now he's cutting you out because he needs your share to pay for his mistakes. How much do you want to bet he's already got your replacement picked out? Another silence. Rick finished his coffee and set the cup down carefully. I'm not promising anything, he said finally. But I'm listening. I left Rick's house with a new ally, not a friend. Rick was too smart to trust anyone completely, but someone whose interests aligned with mine. That afternoon, I set up a post office box under a false name and opened a bank account with cash I'd been saving for years. Anonymous communication and clean money trails, basic operational security. Monday morning, I had a conversation with my supervisor at work. I need to request a schedule change, I told him. What kind of change? More flexibility. I've got some personal issues to deal with, and I might need to adjust my hours from time to time. Personal issues? Family stuff. Nothing that would affect my work quality, but the timing might be unpredictable. He looked at me carefully. I'd been a reliable employee for 3 years, never missed a deadline, never caused problems. How much flexibility are we talking about? Maybe 1 or 2 days a week. I can make up the hours on weekends or evenings. All right. But if this affects your performance or customer satisfaction, we'll need to revisit the arrangement. Understood. That afternoon, I started my new career as a professional investigator. Target, my wife and father. Objective: total destruction of everything they'd built on my back. Phase 1, intelligence gathering. Learn their routines, their weaknesses, their pressure points. Phase 2, asset positioning. Move money, secure evidence, build relationships with people who could help or hurt them. Phase 3, systematic destruction. Legal, financial, social, and professional ruin delivered with surgical precision. I'd learned patience in the Army. Good things came to those who planned carefully and executed flawlessly. Charles and Natalie had been planning my humiliation for over a year. Now it was my turn to plan theirs. Building a network took time. Over the next month, I cultivated relationships with people who had reasons to dislike Charles or Natalie. There was Beth Morrison, a teacher at Meridian Elementary, who'd been passed over for the department head position that went to Natalie. Beth had 14 years of experience versus Natalie's 5, but Natalie had friends in the administration. She's not qualified, Beth told me over coffee, but she knows how to work the system. Always volunteering for the right committees, always agreeing with whatever the principal wants. Must be frustrating. You have no idea. Last month, she suggested changing the curriculum I've been developing for 3 years. When I objected, she went straight to the principal and made it sound like I was being difficult. I listened and sympathized and filed the information away. Beth was angry and looking for validation. Useful combination. There was Tom Richardson, a contractor who'd lost 3 major jobs to Dawson Construction in the past year. All 3 bids had been suspiciously close, with Charles winning by narrow margins that suggested inside information. It's like he knows exactly what we're bidding, Tom complained. Down to the penny sometimes. Makes you wonder who he's talking to on the selection committees. That was interesting. Possible bid rigging, which would be a federal crime if proven. There was Janet Kellner, a city council member who'd been feuding with Charles over zoning changes that would benefit his developments. Charles had been pressuring the mayor to remove Janet from the planning committee. He thinks he owns this town, Janet said, throws money around and expects everyone to jump when he calls. Each conversation gave me more insight into Charles's methods and enemies. He'd made a lot of people angry over the years, but they were all afraid to act individually. Fear of retaliation, economic pressure, political consequences, but fear could be overcome with the right motivation and the right evidence. I started anonymously providing information to the right people. Tax assessments that showed Charles's properties were overvalued for loan purposes. Project timelines that revealed systematic delays and cost overruns. Payroll records that showed family members on company payrolls for no-show jobs. Nothing illegal, everything properly sourced and documented. Just helpful information for people who were already suspicious. The anonymous email account kept sending me more evidence. Security footage from Charles's office building showing Natalie arriving and leaving. Credit card records showing Charles paying for hotel rooms, dinners, and jewelry. Bank transfers that corresponded exactly with their meeting dates. Whoever was feeding me this information had access to everything. Financial records, security systems, personal communications. Someone with significant resources and a serious grudge against Charles and Natalie. I started to suspect it might be Evelyn, Charles's wife. She was smart enough, connected enough, and had the most to gain from exposing the affair. But the technical sophistication suggested professional help. Either way, I wasn't going to waste the opportunity. 3 weeks after my conversation with Rick, he called me. "Can you meet tonight?" "Someplace private." We met at a truck stop diner 20 miles outside town. Rick looked tired and angry. "Charles offered me a buyout yesterday," he said without preamble. "What kind of buyout?" 40% of what my partnership stake is actually worth. Take it or leave it. He's restructuring the company, doesn't need a partner anymore. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd think about it." But we both know what this is really about. He needs my share of the assets to cover his debts. Rick handed me a manila envelope. Financial statements for the partnership. Charles has been borrowing against company assets without my approval. We're leveraged way beyond what I knew about. I looked through the documents. It was worse than I'd thought. Charles had mortgaged properties, taken out business loans, and pledged assets that belonged to the partnership. If any of the major projects failed to deliver, the entire company would collapse. How much does he owe? More than the company's worth, if you include personal guarantees. He's been gambling everything on a few big contracts. What happens if those contracts fall through? Bankruptcy. For the company and probably for Charles personally. This was better than I'd hoped. Charles wasn't just vulnerable to exposure, he was vulnerable to financial pressure. "Rick, how would you feel about accelerating that timeline?" He studied my face. "What do you have in mind?" "Nothing illegal. Nothing that would hurt innocent employees, just helping Charles's bad decisions catch up with him faster than he planned, such as project delays, cost overruns, problems with permits and inspections, quality control issues that require expensive fixes. That would require inside information and access to project sites. Good thing I know someone with 15 years of experience in the construction business." Rick was quiet for a long moment. "Then, what's my cut? You keep your partnership stake. Charles' share goes to pay debts and legal fees. You end up owning the company assuming there's anything left to own. And what do you get out of it? Justice. Rick laughed, but there was no humor in it. Justice. Right. This is about your wife and your father. This is about people who think they can destroy other people's lives without consequences. And you're going to teach them differently. I'm going to help them destroy themselves. They've already done most of the work. Rick finished his coffee and stood up. I'll be in touch. He left the diner without another word. I sat there for another hour, planning the next phase of the operation. Charles and Natalie thought they were smart. They'd isolated me, manipulated me, betrayed me, and expected me to take it quietly. They were about to learn that quiet didn't mean defeated, and defeated didn't mean finished. The first crack appeared 3 weeks later. Dawson Construction's largest contract was a federal courthouse renovation, worth $12 million over 18 months. The project was already 6 months behind schedule due to permitting delays, weather, and what Charles called unforeseen complications. Rick called me on a Tuesday morning. Structural inspection failed, he said. Foundation work has to be redone. At least 8 weeks of delays and probably $2 million in cost overruns. Whose fault? Officially? Subcontractor error? Unofficially? Someone ordered concrete from a supplier who's been cutting corners on aggregate ratios. Someone being Charles. Charles makes all vendor decisions personally. Says it's about maintaining relationships. The courthouse project was Charles's crown jewel, the contract that was supposed to establish Dawson Construction as a major player in federal work. Delays meant penalty payments. Cost overruns meant eating the difference between bid price and actual costs. $2 million was more than the company's annual profit margin. I drove past the construction site that afternoon. Workers stood around looking frustrated while supervisors argued over blueprints. A federal inspector was taking photos and making notes on a clipboard. That evening, I had dinner with Natalie like nothing had changed. How was work? She asked. Same as always, fixing broken things. I heard there were problems with one of your father's construction sites. My father. Even now, she couldn't help herself. What kind of problems? Something about failed inspections. Beth Morrison mentioned it at lunch. Her husband works for the county inspections office. Interesting. Information was flowing through the local gossip network faster than Charles probably realized. I wouldn't know, I said. We don't talk anymore. Maybe you should. He's still your father, Clay. Family is important. Family. From the woman who'd been sleeping with my father for over a year. You're right, I said. Family is important. She smiled and reached across the table to squeeze my hand. I'm glad you feel that way. That night, after Natalie fell asleep, I sent an anonymous tip to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Construction fraud on federal contracts was a serious crime, especially when it involved deliberate use of substandard materials. I included detailed documentation about the concrete supplier, payment records, and timeline correlations between vendor selection and project problems. The FBI wouldn't act immediately, but they would investigate. An investigation would mean scrutiny that Charles couldn't control or manipulate. 2 days later, Rick called again. Charles is panicking, he said. He's been on the phone with lawyers all morning. Something about federal investigators asking questions. What kind of questions? The kind that come with subpoenas for financial records. Perfect. Federal pressure was exactly what Charles couldn't afford right now. That afternoon, I made another anonymous call. This one to the IRS tip line, reporting suspected tax fraud related to consulting fees paid to unqualified family members. I provided Natalie's social security number, Charles's business tax ID, and detailed records of the payments. The IRS loved tax fraud cases, especially ones involving personal relationships and clear paper trails. By Friday, Charles was hemorrhaging money on legal fees and facing audits from 2 different federal agencies. The courthouse project was dead in the water, with penalty payments already exceeding profit margins. Natalie came home that evening looking stressed. Everything okay? I asked. Just work stuff, budget meetings, you know how it is. Another lie. I'd been tracking her movements, and she'd spent 3 hours at Charles's office that afternoon. Emergency meetings, probably, discussing damage control and legal strategies. Want to talk about it? Nothing to talk about, just bureaucratic nonsense. She kissed my cheek and went upstairs to shower, again. Always washing away evidence that didn't exist anymore. I sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee and reading the local newspaper. Front page story about construction delays on the federal courthouse. Editorial about the need for better oversight of government contracts. Charles Dawson's name appeared in both articles, not in a good way. My phone buzzed. Text from Rick. Charles wants to sell his house, needs cash fast. That was interesting. The lakeside mansion was Charles's symbol of success, his proof that a working-class kid could make it big. Selling it meant desperation. I typed back, "Market's soft for luxury properties right now." He knows. Listing it below market value. Below market value. Charles was bleeding money faster than I'd hoped. Phase 2 was ahead of schedule. Time to begin Phase 3. The next month brought a cascade of disasters for Charles and Natalie, each one building on the last like dominoes falling in sequence. First was the IRS audit. They froze Dawson Construction's business accounts pending investigation of the consulting payments to Natalie. No payroll, no vendor payments, no operations. Rick called me the morning it happened. Charles is furious, he said. He's blaming everyone except himself. Lawyers, accountants, even me. What about Natalie? He told her to stay away from the office until this blows over. Doesn't want to make it look worse. That afternoon, I watched Natalie pace our kitchen like a caged animal. She'd gotten the call from Charles 2 hours ago, and she'd been agitated ever since. "This is ridiculous," she said into her phone. There's nothing illegal about consulting fees." I couldn't hear Charles's response, but Natalie's face went pale. "What do you mean we can't see each other? It's just an audit." Another pause, longer this time. "Fine, but this better be temporary." She hung up and looked at me. For a moment, I thought she might confess everything, just break down and tell the truth. Instead, she forced a smile. "Work drama. You know how it is. Anything I can help with?" "No, but thanks. I just need to let some things blow over." Things were blowing over all right, just not in the direction she expected. The second domino fell a week later. The county inspections office announced a review of all Dawson construction projects after irregularities were discovered in the courthouse renovation. Irregularities. Such a clean word for corruption. 5 different job sites were shut down pending reinspection. Projects worth millions of dollars, all dead in the water. Charles couldn't pay workers, couldn't buy materials, couldn't even afford the legal fees to fight the shutdowns. I drove past his house that evening. For sale sign on the lawn, just like Rick had predicted. Lights were on in every room, probably to make it look lived in for potential buyers. Charles's Mercedes sat in the driveway next to Evelyn's BMW. Even from the street, I could see them arguing through the kitchen window. 15 years of marriage, and it was all falling apart in real time. The third domino was Natalie's job. Beth Morrison called me on a Thursday evening. "Thought you should know," she said. "There's going to be an investigation into Natalie's consulting work for Dawson Construction." "What kind of investigation?" "Ethics violation. Teachers aren't supposed to have undisclosed financial relationships with local businesses, especially ones connected to school board members. Charles served on the school board, had for 8 years. Another conflict of interest that would look terrible in the newspapers. Who's investigating? State Education Department. Someone filed a complaint with documentation. Someone. The same anonymous someone who'd been feeding me information for months. When will this become public? Next week, probably. These things move fast once they start. I thanked Beth and hung up. Then I went upstairs where Natalie was grading papers in our bedroom. She looked tired. Older than her 33 years, stress was aging her in real time. "Beth Morrison called," I said. Natalie looked up sharply. "What did she want?" "Just checking in, said there might be some issues at school next week." "What kind of issues?" She wasn't specific. Something about ethics investigations? I watched Natalie's face carefully. The color drained away, leaving her skin pale and tight around the eyes. "Did she say anything else?" "No. Should she have?" Natalie shook her head too quickly. "No, it's probably nothing." You know how Beth exaggerates? But I could see the fear in her eyes. The careful house of cards she and Charles had built was collapsing faster than they could shore it up. That night, she clung to me in bed like she was drowning. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered 14 months of lies. 14 months of betrayal while I trusted her completely. 14 months of my wife and my father laughing about how stupid and weak I was. Sympathy was a luxury I couldn't afford. The fourth domino fell 3 days later. Rick called me at 6 in the morning. "Turn on Channel 8 News." I grabbed the remote and found the local station. Lead story: local businessman under federal investigation for construction fraud. Charles's photo filled the screen while the anchor read from a teleprompter. Federal agents raided the offices of Dawson Construction yesterday evening, seizing financial records and computer equipment as part of an ongoing investigation into fraudulent billing practices on government contracts. The footage showed FBI agents carrying boxes out of Charles's office building. His Mercedes was in the parking lot, but Charles was nowhere to be seen. Sources close to the investigation suggest the probe centers on the use of substandard materials in federal construction projects, potentially endangering public safety. Public safety, that phrase would stick. No one wanted to hire a contractor who cut corners on safety. My phone rang. Natalie, calling from school. "Clay, are you watching the news?" "I am now." "This is terrible. Poor Charles. Poor Charles." Even now, with everything falling apart, she was more worried about him than about us. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding," I said. "Do you think we should reach out, see if there's anything we can do?" "We." As if I had any reason to help the man who'd disowned me and stolen my wife. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said. "We should stay out of it." "You're probably right. I feel bad for him." She felt bad for him. Not for me, not for our marriage, not for the lies she'd been telling for over a year. For him. That afternoon, the ethics investigation became public. Local newspaper ran the story on page 3. Elementary teacher under investigation for undisclosed business relationship. They didn't name Natalie specifically, but in a town of 12,000 people, everyone would know within hours. I was at work when Mika found me. "You need to see this," she said, handing me her phone. Facebook post from Meridian Elementary's parent group. "Anyone else concerned about the teacher who's been taking money from the school board member's construction company? What kind of educational services was she really providing?" The comments were brutal. Parents demanding answers, calling for Natalie's resignation, questioning every grade and recommendation she'd given their children. "This is getting ugly fast," Mika said. "Yeah, it is." She studied my face carefully. "You don't seem surprised." "Should I be?" Most people would be shocked to find out their wife was involved in something like this. I met her eyes. "Most people don't know their wives as well as they think they do." Understanding dawned in Mika's expression. "Clay, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything. I just stopped being blind." That evening, Natalie came home in tears. She'd been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation's outcome. Full pay, but no classroom duties, no contact with students or parents. "This is so unfair," she sobbed. "I never did anything wrong." The consulting work was completely legitimate. "What kind of consulting work?" I asked. She looked up sharply, realizing she'd said too much. "Just curriculum advice, educational planning." Nothing inappropriate. For Charles's construction company? They were bidding on school construction projects. They needed someone with educational expertise. Another lie. Dawson Construction had never bid on a school project. I'd checked. "I'm sure it will all work out," I said. "The truth always comes out eventually." "I hope so. I don't know what I'll do if I lose my job." What she'd do, not what we'd do. Even in crisis, it was all about her. I held her while she cried, stroking her hair and making soothing sounds, playing the supportive husband while she mourned the collapse of her affair. "Everything's going to be okay," I whispered. And for the first time in over a year, I was telling the truth. 2 weeks later, Charles's world finished collapsing. The federal investigation uncovered everything. Fraudulent billing, substandard materials, kickbacks from suppliers, bid rigging on government contracts, 23 felony counts with more charges pending. Rick called me the morning the indictments were announced. "Charles is done," he said. "Federal prosecutors are offering him a plea deal. 15 years in prison if he cooperates, 30 if he fights it." "What about the company? Bankruptcy, all assets seized." "I'm going to lose everything too, but at least I won't be wearing orange jumpsuits." I felt a moment of regret about Rick. He'd been Charles's partner, but he'd also been honest with me when it mattered. "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't be. I should have seen this coming years ago. Charles was always cutting corners, always pushing the boundaries. I just didn't want to admit it." That afternoon, I drove past Charles's house. The for sale sign now had a sold sticker across it. Black SUVs were parked in the driveway, federal agents conducting another search. Charles's empire was gone. 25 years of building connections, accumulating assets, buying influence, all destroyed in 2 months. But I wasn't finished yet. Natalie came home that evening with termination papers. The school board had voted unanimously to fire her, effective immediately. No severance, no benefits, no references. "I'm going to fight this," she said, waving the papers. "Get a lawyer. Sue for wrongful termination." "With what money?" She looked at me like I'd slapped her. "We have savings. We have $3,000 in savings. Legal fees would cost 10 times that. Then we'll get a loan." "Against what collateral?" "My truck and my grandmother's house?" Reality was setting in. Without her teaching salary and with Charles's money cut off, Natalie was facing the same financial pressure that working people dealt with every day. "I could get another job," she said. "Teaching positions in other districts. Not with an ethics violation on your record, and not with federal investigators asking questions about your consulting work." Her face crumpled. "This isn't fair. I never did anything illegal." "Maybe not illegal, but you did take money from Charles for over a year. $3,000 a month. What did you do to earn that money, Natalie?" She went very still. "What do you mean?" "I mean Charles doesn't pay anyone $3,000 a month for curriculum advice. So what were you really doing for him?" "I told you, educational consulting." "Bull crap." The word hung between us like a blade. I'd never called her a liar directly before. "Clay?" 14 months, Natalie. 14 months of consulting fees. 14 months of Tuesday and Friday afternoon meetings. 14 months of lies. Her face went white. "How did you—" "No? Because I'm not as stupid as you thought I was." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside were printed copies of everything: financial records, hotel receipts, photographs, text messages. "You've been sleeping with my father for over a year," I said. "Taking his money, using our house for your meetings, lying to my face every single day." Natalie's hands shook as she looked through the documents. "Where did you get these?" "Does it matter? Clay, I can explain." "Explain what? That you've been whoring yourself out to the man who disowned me? That you've been planning this behind my back for over a year? That every time you told me you loved me, you were lying?" She started crying again, but these weren't tears of self-pity. These were tears of someone who'd been caught and knew it. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she whispered. "How was it supposed to happen? You and Charles were going to run away together, live happily ever after on money stolen from federal contracts? We never meant to hurt you. You never meant to get caught." "There's a difference." I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, our neighborhood looked exactly the same as it had that morning. Same houses, same cars, same people living their normal lives. But everything had changed. "I want you out," I said without turning around. "Clay, please, we can work this out. Go to counseling. Start over. There's nothing to work out. You made your choice 14 months ago. Where am I supposed to go?" "I don't have any money." "That's not my problem anymore." I heard her gathering up the papers, sniffling and trying to compose herself. "This is all Charles's fault," she said. "He pursued me. He convinced me that you didn't love me anymore." I turned to face her. "Charles didn't make you lie to me every day for over a year. Charles didn't make you take his money. Charles didn't make you sleep with him in our house while I was at work. I made mistakes. You made choices. Now live with them." She left that night, taking 2 suitcases and her car. I watched from the kitchen window as she loaded her belongings, probably trying to figure out where she could go. Not to Charles. He was facing federal prison and bankruptcy. His house was sold, his accounts frozen, his reputation destroyed. Not to her parents. They'd disowned her when she married me, claiming I wasn't good enough for their daughter. Maybe a hotel, maybe a friend's couch. Maybe she'd figure out what it felt like to have no support system and no financial safety net. After she left, I sat in my kitchen drinking coffee and reading through the divorce papers I'd had prepared weeks ago. Adultery was grounds for fault-based divorce in our state, which meant Natalie wouldn't get half of anything. The house would remain mine. The savings would remain mine. She could keep her car and her debts. My phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Is this Clay Dawson? Who's asking?" "This is Agent Sarah Mitchell with the FBI. We'd like to speak with you about your father's business activities and your wife's consulting relationship with Dawson Construction." "When?" "Tomorrow morning, if possible, 10 o'clock at our field office." "I'll be there." "Mr. Dawson?" You should know that you're not a target of this investigation. We believe you may have information that could help us understand the scope of the fraud. Information. I had plenty of that. I'll bring everything I have, I said. After I hung up, I went upstairs to the bedroom I'd shared with Natalie for 8 years. Her side of the closet was empty now, hangers scattered on the floor where she'd grabbed clothes in a hurry. On her nightstand was a framed photo of our wedding day. We looked young and happy, full of plans for the future we'd build together. I threw the photo in the trash and stripped the sheets off the bed. Tomorrow, I'd tell the FBI everything I knew about Charles's business practices and Natalie's role in covering them up. Not because I wanted revenge anymore, because it was the right thing to do. 6 months later, I sat in the federal courthouse watching Charles Dawson get sentenced to 18 years in prison. He'd taken the plea deal after all. 18 years for fraud, corruption, and conspiracy. At 61, he'd be nearly 80 when he got out, if he lived that long. Natalie sat 3 rows behind me with her court-appointed attorney. She'd been charged as a co-conspirator for laundering money through the consulting payments. The prosecution offered her 5 years probation in exchange for testimony against Charles. She took the deal. When it was her turn to speak, she stood at the podium and read from a prepared statement about how sorry she was, how she'd been manipulated and coerced, how she never intended to break the law. The judge wasn't impressed. Mrs. Dawson, you were a licensed teacher, a position of trust in the community. You accepted money you knew you hadn't earned for work you knew you hadn't performed. Whether you were coerced or not, you made conscious choices to participate in fraudulent activity. 5 years probation, restitution of $36,000. Permanent loss of teaching license, registration as a felon. Charles got his turn to speak too. He apologized to the court, to the community, to the workers who'd lost their jobs when Dawson Construction collapsed. He didn't apologize to me. When the judge asked if anyone else wanted to make a statement, I stood up. Your Honor, I'm Clay Dawson, Charles Dawson's son. The courtroom went quiet. Everyone knew about the family connections, but I hadn't spoken publicly about any of it. I'd like to make a victim impact statement. The judge nodded. Proceed. I walked to the podium and looked at Charles for the first time in 8 months. He'd aged a decade since his arrest. Gray hair, hollow cheeks, the broken look of a man who'd lost everything. Your Honor, Charles Dawson destroyed my life long before he committed the crimes that brought him to this courtroom. He disowned me when I needed help. He stole my wife while pretending to be a family man. He taught me that blood doesn't make you family, and family doesn't make you trustworthy. I paused and looked at Natalie. She was crying silently, probably hoping I'd say something about forgiveness or moving forward. But he also taught me something else. He taught me that actions have consequences, that lies eventually surface, that people who think they're untouchable eventually discover they're not. I turned back to Charles. You called me weak. You said I was a failure. You were wrong about both. I'm strong enough to rebuild my life without you. And I'm successful enough to watch you lose everything you thought mattered. The courtroom was dead silent. I hope you use the next 18 years to figure out who you really are when you can't buy respect or manipulate people. Because the man you were for 61 years wasn't worth knowing. I walked back to my seat without looking at either of them again. After the sentencing, I drove back to my house, the house Charles had wanted to sell after my grandmother died. I'd renovated it over the past 6 months, turning it into the kind of place I actually wanted to live in. Mika was waiting on my front porch with 2 cups of coffee and a manila envelope. How did it go? She asked. 18 years for Charles. 5 years probation for Natalie. And you? Free. She handed me the envelope. Partnership papers for the new company, Meridian Mechanical Services. You and me, 50-50 partners. I'd used the money from Natalie's restitution and Charles's seized assets to start my own HVAC company. Mika had agreed to leave her job with the county and join me as co-owner. You sure about this? I asked. After watching you take down Charles Dawson, I figure you're the kind of partner I want to have. We sat on the porch drinking coffee and watching the sun set over Lake Meridian. The expensive houses on the other side of the lake looked smaller from here, less impressive. Any regrets? Mika asked. I thought about it. About Charles and Natalie? No. They made their choices. About how you handled it? I could have confronted them directly, filed for divorce immediately, Let them destroy themselves without my help. But they would have found a way to blame me, make me the victim again. This way, they have to live with the consequences of their own actions. Think they'll learn anything from it? Charles? No. He'll spend 18 years convinced he was the victim of a witch hunt. Natalie? I shrugged. Maybe. Losing everything has a way of teaching people who they really are. My phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Justice served. Well played. I showed the message to Mika. Your anonymous benefactor? Has to be? Any idea who it was? I have a theory, but it doesn't matter anymore. We finished our coffee as the stars came out. Tomorrow, Mika and I would start building something new. A business based on honest work and fair dealing, the kind of company Charles had pretended to run. Clay, Mika said as she got up to leave. Yeah, for what it's worth, I think your grandmother would be proud of you. After she left, I sat on the porch for another hour, thinking about the past 2 years, the betrayal, the investigation, the planning, the execution. Charles and Natalie had tried to destroy me slowly, quietly, thinking I was too weak to fight back. They were wrong. I wasn't weak. I was patient. And patience, combined with determination and the right evidence, could accomplish almost anything. The lake was calm now, reflecting the lights from the houses on the far shore. Those lights looked different to me now, not symbols of success or status, but just lights. Just people living their lives, making their choices, dealing with their consequences. I went inside and locked the door behind me. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new choices to make. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, I slept peacefully. Justice had been served.